Welcome. This is the Study Pro, our center director. I'm a founder, one of the founders and owners. This is Lindsay Tom. She's our center director, amongst many other things that she does. I also want to introduce a friend of ours, Kathy Grulich, who's from the Special Education PTA of Fairfax County, and obviously she has some information up here if you're interested in anything that they do. You want to say anything?
If you would like to get our material, there's a place to share your meeting.
Great. Well, we're glad that she's here, and thank you all for coming. And certainly, we're going to get to Dan as quickly as possible. We just wanted to share a few things about things that are actually upcoming, and just 5 seconds on our center, which I'll use this for now. There we go. Okay, so very quickly, Study Pro is an executive function and study skills center. So we are very much focused on process versus content, which means that we are focused on how you do school versus the math, science, history that you do school. I think. Sorry about that, guys.
Do you know what it is? Because we're usually at 1 o'clock, and so the 10 o'clock technology is like, nope, not going to do it for you.
Yeah, for those of you who have been our lesson learners. There we go. Okay. And so we do believe that there's a lot of super, super smart kids. I have hopefully 2 of them that don't always do as well as their potential, just because sometimes their executive functions, that part of their brains that help them with time management, organization, breaking work down, just aren't as evolved as the demands. So school demands that you know how to take a test and study 3 days ahead of time. But how many of your kids do that? Even 3 hours ahead of time, even at all. We have an active study strategies workshop, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, where we ask the kids right at the beginning, how many of you study? And or how do you study? And many of them just don't study at all, or the way they study is how. What's number one? Rereading their notes, right? And so we start, and I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, I won't say this later, we start by giving them a collage of all of these different pictures, and we say to them, okay, take a look at this for about a minute, and then we ask them later in the presentation in the afternoon, well, how many of you write down how many you remember? And by rereading their notes, which is pretty the moral equivalent of looking at that, there's very few they remember. But then we take some active study strategies in terms of categorization. What colors are they? What sports do they represent? Mnemonics, things like that. And then as they start working with them and they're manipulating the information in their mind, then what happens? They start to learn more and more. And so what we realized is that, even though we have some very, very smart kids, we really need to help them understand strategies to learn. And that's really what Study Pro is all about. So as I said, we're really about process versus content. We teach the skills very specifically, like you would teach any skill, a sport, an art, a music instrument. We want them to understand the technical aspects of, you do need to have a certain organizational process, right? You need to have a way to show what's done, what's not done. You need to have a way, especially as you get middle school and high school, to store, notes and quizzes and things that are going to move up to a cumulative test. So we do that even in the forms of writing, which we'll talk about here in a minute. We also have a way to practice the skills, which is where the kids do right here in the homework center, right after they drop off their phones, which is our #1 win. And no one ever gives us problems, which is hard to believe. And then we also have a way for them to personalize the skills, because sometimes kids just need a system that works better for them. Very specifically, I refuse to write things down in a planner. Okay, let's find something that works for you. And let's also have an opportunity to talk about how that brain can be used for things that are more important than trying to remember the specifics of when things are due. So let's find a way to make that happen, and you don't have to rely on your brain, because it doesn't always come through for any of us when we have too much in it. So we talked a little bit about active study strategies. We often get this question, what's the difference between the course that you teach, time management, organization, breaking work down, and then the active study strategies? Well, we got so excited about the part of our course that actually allows students to learn how to more actively make, create, do things with information that we just said we need its own afternoon. So we have a course that's really crafted by Lindsay, so I'll hand it over to her, that allows kids to learn if I have information that's dense, because it's history, science, or even math, and I need different ways to remember it and different strategies to remember it, how do I do that? And that's really where this 3-hour workshop comes from.
As Debbie was saying, the rereading my notes, that's the #1 default for active studying. And we do in the workshop, we ask the students, so do you believe that studying is hard? And they all agree that studying is hard. And then, do you agree that studying is fun? And all of them do not agree that studying is fun. It's the least fun thing in the world. And that's what we wanted to show them through this workshop, is that it doesn't have to be hard. Rereading your notes is actually a laborious activity. It's hard, it's definitely not fun. It does not keep your attention. Your eyes are moving, but you're just going to the bottom of the page. You're not actually retaining the information. So what we wanted to give them were strategies to make it feel easier, but have the right amount of challenge to make it fun, that it was engaging. And so when they left and they're like, oh, so I actually have the tools that I can make this not such a painful process, but then it also equates to better results, then why not, right? That's what we had to show them, that it could actually get their goals accomplished, that it was not just the adult or the teacher saying, okay, you got to do something to study, but not telling them what that something was. So that's what was really helpful to see in that. And so these are some examples here. These are my charting that I have to say this, I hate my handwriting, so seeing it up there, it's like, oh my goodness. But the goal was to say that they would have these different ways. They could have used Post-it notes and how to use a sequence, how to make something engaging, manipulative, how to make a chart. Why would you use a T-chart to compare and contrast in some situations? Why would you use note cards? Some of our kids, does anyone just default to Quizlet as their way to study? But that's not always the best tool. And it's definitely not the best tool if you're not the one making the Quizlet. Right? Then that's not learning. So, and then diagramming and how to make a diagram. So we actually have them do some of these
Before you go
exercises
on,
here.
I just want to say that. So for those of you at home, a lot of times we talk to do at home, a lot of times we talk to kids and say, when you're reading a book for school, rather than just reading the book, make a very quick T-chart about every chapter at least, main idea and detail, so that when you're done, you have almost a summary of the whole book. Because wouldn't you rather, when you're done, have that summary, say, so much easier to write the paper, or use little stickies, or actually get the copy of the book that you can highlight and take notes in. And it's a very simple strategy, but sometimes, and that's what we do in our writing classes, how do you get into the reading so that the writing is easier, and the writing is more productive, and the writing is more representative? Because who remembers what happened in chapter 2 when you're at chapter 12, right? It's hard for us to remember.
So just taking it from that more passive, than I'm just a passive learner, to actually being active, giving them the tools so that they can retain it longer. Remember, it's not just about cramming for the test that's tomorrow. It's about being able to hold on to the information long term. And then that buy-in, that's just to see them, that they see the equation between my effort that I'm putting in when I'm studying for a test to the results that they're hoping and they deserve to have. So the next one is this actual coming Sunday that we have coming up. But then we'll be offering it monthly and it's for middle schoolers.
We're going to be moving to high schoolers quickly soon. So was anyone here for Dr. Brenner's presentation on preparing for, she is actually holding a workshop on 2 different days, the 20th and the 22nd, to extend what she talked about and have much more hands-on exercises. We already have, I know, at least a couple of attendees that are here right now. So if you're interested, this is all in the parent workshop section, or you can just tell us afterwards. But she is excellent. She wrote, obviously, the offer of How to College, and really digs into what are the things we need to prepare ourselves and start preparing for this is for high school parents, even starting in 9th grade for kids as they're heading off to college. How do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare our kids? And what are some of the types of things? So very interactive and I think really specific ideas. And then next month, our Lunch and Learn on February 13th. We are going to live stream it because it's already sold out. It's free, Lunch and Learn, but sometimes people, especially towards the end, their plans change. So if you're interested in coming and you haven't signed up yet, just wait, the live stream will come out. Or you can sign up towards the end because I'm sure, just like today, a lot of people say they can't make it. But Rachel Bailey, has anyone heard her speak? She's really fantastic, and she does an incredible talk on self-esteem. And then she's doing a parent group for 10 parents. I think we still have at least 4 or 5 spots available. Afterwards, she's doing a 6-week parent group that hosts her talk. And that's all on a website also under parent programs. And we do have essential study skills and writing courses that are starting in February. The writing course is very, very much towards kids, again, the process piece. So if kids have a lack of confidence in starting to write, they are perfectionistic in writing, they wait till the last minute to write, they don't like to edit. A lot of it's really excellent in terms of helping them understand the process of writing and the different types of writing for both middle school and high school. So if you have to write a persuasive essay or a narrative essay, we actually help them with tools so that when they walk away, they know they have structures to be able to make that easier for them. And study skills for 4th and 5th grade, which is also starting in February. And then, without further ado, Dr. Dan is a legend. How many of you have heard of him before he came here today? Most of us. Yes. Well, it's legendary. Heard from his practice is based in Rockville, although he does many other programs. In fact, we're talking about him doing a program here in spring, so I think he'll bring that up. He's a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. I wish I had known more about him when my son was growing up, but you guys are lucky enough to know about him now. His books are on sale in the back. There's an honor system, so please pick one up and just drop the money in there. And he is here to talk, of course, about ADHD medications, beginning, middle, and potentially end. And with that, we'd like to welcome him, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Is this thing working?
Yeah.
Sing a little song. So thanks for having me. And I got some friends here and many new faces. Swam the Virginia, the Potomac to get to Virginia here. So it seems pretty friendly so far. So I would like to do more of my work in Virginia. So the 10-session parent training program that's based on, actually the book's based on the program, we've been doing for 37 years now. And it's a cool pay-what-you-can model to make the program more available and affordable for families. And it seems to work. People really do the best they can to pitch in when they can. People who can't pay are welcome to come. So that's one thing that we're not going to do today. But if there's enough interest here, this is such a great place. And Debbie and Lindsay and Kathy have really got it going on, and I'm so impressed. So I'd love to partner up here if there's enough interest, I guess, so that we don't conflict with the kids who are through here. It would have to be a daytime program. So after I'm done talking, you can see, I might ask if you have folks who are interested, and we can target spring if there's enough interest. But today, we're going to focus on the second book that just came out that has specific topics. One is what we're going to cover today, ADHD medication management, a deep dive. Second excursion, as I call it, is on parallel exposure therapy for anxiety, not just cognitive behavioral therapy for individual children as if they exist in a vacuum, but looking at family systems, looking at how schools support kids with anxiety. So that's excursion 2. Excursion 3 is the common overlap of autism, anxiety, and ADHD. These things travel together. 4 is how to change the world to make it more autism friendly in our schools, in our communities. So that's the so-called social choreography for kids on the autism spectrum. And the 5th excursion I co-wrote with my son, Aaron, who's an intern in the Bronx, who specializes in transgender health. There is overlap between autism spectrum and transgender variation, and of course sexuality too. So that's a juicy 5th excursion on autism, sexuality, and gender. So today we'll focus on excursion number 1 and start with one of my favorite quotes by Rollo May. The human freedom involves our capacity to pause, emphasize that word pause, between the stimulus and response, kind of the language of behaviorism, right? B.F. Skinner, stimulus, response, Pavlov, light, meat, dog salivates, these are conditioned reflexes. We can, unlike dogs presented a slab of meat, we can pause and consider whether to eat the meat. Hey, how about our cholesterol level? And it's the pause that gives us a degree of freedom, a degree of control, a degree of hesitation when presented with stimulus. You can think of ADHD as a relative problem with pausing. It could be caused inconsistent pause disorder, if you like. And we're going to focus on medication as one way, one of many ways to help kids pause more consistently than they do naturally. Because kids, as Ross Green says, do well if they can. If kids have trouble with pausing, with their inhibitory system, it's because there's a brain-based difference. It's not that they're waking up every morning trying to make your life miserable or their own life miserable. These kids want to do well, but have a legitimate brain-based problem with putting on the brakes. So we're going to cover some controversial issues here. How many of you have kids with a clear-cut ADHD issue? How many of you have kids who are middle school, high school, adult? So it's the usual range, and ADHD is a lifespan issue. And I'm often asked, well, what if a kid needs medicine, has a diagnosis of ADHD in childhood? What are the chances of being able to outgrow that? About 30%. Is the best research we have. That's 70% of childhood ADHD becomes adult ADHD. 30%, your brain matures, you learn compensatory strategies. You might be allowed for the first time in your life to specialize in areas of interest and strength, and your ADHD just doesn't compromise your performance quite as much. But when we diagnose ADHD in childhood, we share with parents and kids that this is likely to be an ongoing issue. It's not just a phase. So we're going to answer these types of questions and take a deep dive. There's a lot of material I have prepared to present, but those of you who have heard me talk before know I like to be interrupted. So I want this to be interactive. I want you to shoot up your hand and say, hey, what about my kid? Or what about this question? The more interactive it is, the more interesting it will be for you, and the more interesting it will be for me. I don't want to just listen to myself talk. So if we don't cover everything, at least you'll get a feel for one approach. And I'm glad to linger after if people like it, if they want to ask some more individual questions. My email is back here. Where'd it go? It's not on there. It's Dr. Dan Shapiro at gmail.com, or you can reach me through the website, parentchildjourney.com. So everything we're going to cover today is in the book Parent-Child Excursions, the first chapter. So here's what we're going to cover: diagnosis. I'd like to buzz through that and then get down to practical considerations of medication management. Why we should consider medication for anyone with a legitimate diagnosis of ADHD. How to do a trial effectively. This might be a little bit different than some of you have seen before. Managing side effects. The big issue that's underappreciated is filling medication troughs. A lot of kids are on the right medication, but there's a morning trough, an evening trough. Sit down and do homework, you're at Study Pro, and medication's wearing off. Good luck. So we want to talk about even coverage. All right. And then what about discontinuing? Why do we discontinue? How do we do that? So there's turf to cover, so we'll plunge right in. Okay. So for starters, most of you are probably familiar with these diagnostic criteria for inattentive type ADHD. I'm not going to go through them all. Distractibility, inattention, losing things, etc. So if you got 6 to 9 of those, you got inattentive type ADHD. if you get 6 of 9 of these hyperactive impulsive type symptoms, not being able to stop and think, or brain breaks, or inconsistent brain breaks, then you got the hyperactive impulsive type. Please, yes.
At what age do you say that children are out of their early childhood phase where all of this stuff might be developmentally appropriate?
So what's the difference between normal human variation and disorder?
Yeah.
Toddlers will normally have a degree of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and distractibility. These are developmental skills, right? So you can diagnose a toddler with severe ADHD. The kid who's been kicked out of his third preschool, is wreaking havoc in a home, can't interact normally with friends because they are just a wild man of Borneo. And so the more severe the ADHD, the earlier you can diagnose it. But the milder it is, it might just be normal developmental, freedom from cultural conditioning. So I'm not making a case for squashing kids' spirit here. I am making a case for relieving real disability. It's a great lead question. Thank you for asking it. And generally speaking, the hyperactive impulsive symptoms soften over the years. So diagnostic criteria for ADHD change from preschool to elementary school to adolescent to adult life. Adult checklists for ADHD diagnosis emphasize more executive dysfunction, internal distractibility. Childhood checklists for ADHD have more of these hyperactive impulsive components. As your prefrontal cortex, that mission control, that stop and think center matures up over the years, the way ADHD presents changes as well. So, great lead question, thank you. So if you have mainly inattentive type symptoms, fine. If you have mainly hyperactive impulsive type, and most kids have combined. The preschool, elementary school age. It's through high school and into adult life that the hyperactive impulsive stuff tends to settle. But things change. There's a point. The way ADHD presents changes depending on what task is put in front of you today, what setting you're in front of today, what developmental phase you're in over the course of your life. So there are some med students and law students who, for the first time, they're very bright people, but they've been able to compensate for their ADHD, but given the load that you get a master in intense graduate training, their ADHD might not have been sufficiently taxed when they were younger. They might have been able to power their way through tasks when they're younger, but they have legitimate ADHD that presents in adulthood just because the bar gets raised so dramatically. So it depends on what life is throwing at you, whether your ADHD is subtle, medium, or obviously messing you up. So most inattention is not ADHD. As we talk about diagnosis here, you can have inattention secondary to the whole textbook of developmental and behavioral pediatrics. Inattention just as a normal popular thing or a normal behavioral style thing. So only if there is significant impairment across settings, across people over time, that's when we diagnose ADHD. So a disorder is about dysfunction. It's not just a checklist whether you're a little distractible or not. It has to be causing a problem to make a diagnosis of ADHD. Some environments can be so distracting that a child presents as if they have ADHD, but they're just in a classroom that's too noisy or too chaotic, or a home that's like that too. You can have a mismatch between the task and the child's abilities. So whether you have a legitimate learning disability that's making a task difficult, or just a different interest. Our cookie cutter society insists that kids be interested in all things that we present to them. Well, some kids just aren't. And they might have variable attention depending upon what's in front of them. How about anxiety, depression, mood dysregulation, bipolar? Well, if you read the diagnostic criteria for any mood disorder, there's a problem with attention and self-regulation for any mood disorder. ADHD, by the way, often has a problem with emotional impulsivity and mood dysregulation as part of ADHD. And our hero researcher, Russell Barkley, lobbied for DSM-5, the diagnostic manual, to include a problem with mood regulation in the checklist. He was voted down. But anybody who knows anybody with ADHD knows that there's often a problem with mood regulation that's part of ADHD. But here the point is, you can have attention problems that are secondary to problems with mood regulation. Chicken egg. Trauma is an underappreciated cause of inattention. All sorts of life stresses. A lot of kids with learning disabilities, especially language, have secondary problems with attention. Concentration disorder, more pejoratively called sluggish cognitive tempo, is relatively new on the scene. These are kids who don't have problems with inhibition. In fact, they might be overly inhibited, but the wheels turn more slowly, they need more time, and if you give those kids stimulant medication, you might make them worse. So it is a different animal, sluggish cognitive tempo or concentration deficit disorder, than ADHD per se. It often is misdiagnosed as inattentive type ADHD. Please.
Is that slow processing?
Great question, and I don't have a good answer. I asked Russell Barkley the same question when I first heard him present on the topic. Slow processing speed is a something that is a number that's produced when you do an IQ test. There are certain tasks that an educational psychologist presents, and based on how fluently, how automatically you do certain tasks, a number is produced, processing speed. And these are kids who are typically given extended time. There's probably some overlap between kids who score low for processing speed on a WISC, an intelligence test, and kids who have sluggish cognitive tempo, but we don't know if there's a cause-effect connection physiologically, whether the same animal or not. It's a good question. If anybody wants to do a great PhD thesis, there's one out there for somebody to look at. But it goes beyond cognition. There's also a motor component to it. These are kids who, in terms of motor coordination, motor planning, they also seem to go about life a little bit slower. Great question. So, and so on. I won't belabor the point here, but there's a whole list of things that can cause inattention secondarily. But most ADHD is not just ADHD. Most ADHD has other stuff along for the ride. This whole list can coexist with ADHD. So Mel Levine would say, hey, if you got a little bit of this, and a little bit of this, and a little bit of this, and a little bit of this, you take each of these things separately, they might be mild, but when you overlap them, there can be dysfunction at the junction of these functions. If you are looking at a child through one lens, or another, or another, or another, you might say, no big deal, no big deal, no big deal, no big deal. But when you've got a kid with a combination of issues, and put them in a classroom, or put them in front of some homework, or put them on a soccer field, or put them anywhere, it's the combination of issues that's impairing, not one by itself. And this is my main message to parents and clinicians. Look at the whole child, look at the whole profile. Let's not be one diagnosis clinicians, whether it's this or this. Please.
Just curious about along those lines. I have a 15-year-old niece who has had anxiety most of her life, treated, and now is just being evaluated for ADHD. And I only have boys, so it's kind of like, I'm just curious about maybe your comments Oh, sorry, your comments on girls versus boys, you know, I mean.
Yeah, girls present differently than
Yeah.
boys. They tend to have more of the attentive type, you know, the stereotypical boy, the hyperactive, bouncy boy. I have a problem with these generalizations, though, because there are just as many girls that I see in my practice who have the combined type, and I have just as many boys who are sneaky, anxious kids. So if you know, generally, our culture biases us regarding diagnosis. And I think inattentive type boys who are internally anxious tend to get missed. I think girls who are hyperactive and impulsive are called all sorts of other things rather than getting their ADHD treated. So I have a problem with stereotyping kids according to diagnostic label. Although there's maybe a little kernel of truth to the stereotypes. And you hear this with autism, right? That girls present differently than boys. There's just enough truth to it that we start biasing ourselves, but I want to look at each kid as an individual. It's another wonderful question. So let's think broadly when we're thinking about diagnosis here. This is what the first book is all about, how to do functional assessment across all domains of development. Get away from these artificial categories. ADHD, autism, anxiety, these are categorical diagnoses that get us money from insurance companies, and get us 504 plans and IEPs and research dollars, fine. But when you're really managing individual human beings, we should move beyond these boxes and look more holistically at a child across all developmental domains. Soapbox time.
Here's a question.
I didn't see. Forgive me.
I those individual functional, the child has just enough, they're not really looking quite workly, so then how do you help the schools to maybe understand they're doing the ADHD and autism and this?
By looking at function, by looking at availability for learning.
Right.
So I'll latch on to any diagnosis that a school lets them latch on to. So if they're cool with an ADHD diagnosis and other health impaired diagnostic code, cool. We've got our foot in the door for an IEP, or without an actual code for 504. But let's say you get them to acknowledge that there's an ADHD diagnosis. Then we can have additional pages in the IEP that cover their social pragmatic language issues, their fine motor problems, their anxiety, their executive dysfunction. Once you've got a label, then you can attach to that label broad, comprehensive management with goals and strategies across all those domains. But you do need one hook. And often, when you got ADHD, that's the hook I use, because I got the power. I can diagnose ADHD as a clinician. And there's no psychometric test that they can do that denies my diagnosis. If I say a child has a reading disorder, they can say, sorry, test's on grade level. So if you got it, use it, Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Please.
Along those lines, one of the things we're kind of new to this, but I'm trying to kind of understand
A common combination. People here go with ADHD and dyslexia diagnosis for some.
So it's a little bit confusing because we're remedy in the sense that like it's kind of an app that the dyslexia for the processing. We're sometimes having, we've also kind of got some gifted traits, sometimes having to get time. It's distracting.
Yep.
And then that becomes kind of productive. So I'm in that process right now, but I'm trying to understand that that's how to do it.
Perfect example of if you only have a hammer, all the world's a nail. So, if the only thing that you have to accommodate a child with any kind of learning difference is extended time. Oh, well, for some kids that'll help, for some kids it backfires. They just spend more time being lost. Pardon? Well, they're too impulsive and distracted to use that time. So for some kids, extended time is the death of creative, individualized instruction. For some kids, it's a godsend. But what we want to do is match the strategy to the child. And what I'm going to try to do here is shift here beyond general diagnostic considerations. So you get a feel for where I'm coming from with management. So I will want you to continue to go, but every now and then I'm going to hit another slide because there's just so much to talk about with each of these things. So if that's okay with you, I'm going to emphasize for the moment, as important as it is to talk generally about diagnosis, today's talk is going to be focused on medication management for ADHD. But I'm so glad that you're raising the issues that, hey, there's more to ADHD care than ADHD, and there's more to ADHD care than just medication. Today, it's just going to be about meds primarily, but I don't want to imply that that's the whole game. It's not. It's part of a comprehensive treatment plan, but not a standalone plan. So why do we treat? This is not cosmetic psychopharmacology. This is not, and we use the language of disability when it's appropriate to do so, because failure to do so has serious consequences. This is not about the difference between getting an A and a B. So kids with ADHD, based on good longitudinal studies, look at the Milwaukee longitudinal study over decades and decades. If you don't treat ADHD, you can have secondary anxiety, depression, and your risk of suicide goes up. If you don't treat ADHD, it's going to cause stress in the family. There's great debate about the incidence of divorce in families with ADHD. It's not as high as some of the literature says, but we all know that it can cause stress in a marriage and in sibling relations. This is a big deal. It's not just about academic performance. What's more important in your life than your relations with your family and social relations? ADHD, the impulsivity, distractibility, hyperactivity interferes with our success connecting with people who are important in our lives. We have all sorts of dangerous behaviors that are much more common in people with ADHD, not just sexual, but motor vehicle accidents. Quite poignantly, Russell Barkley's own brother died in a motor vehicle accident. And his brother had very severe ADHD. And Barkley's written on this, how his brother refused treatment. And it was reckless driving that killed Barkley's own brother. What a tragic tale. So school underperformance, failure to complete college, unemployment, homelessness, trouble with the law. Our prison systems are full of people with untreated ADHD. And most dramatically, Barkley's longitudinal study, this came out at the CHAD conference last year, where Barkley presented data that you have 9 to 13 years less life. 9 to 13 years shorter life expectancy for untreated ADHD. Now, this is untreated ADHD because people with ADHD, they have a higher incidence of fatal accidents, but they also don't take care of themselves. Right now, you are dealing with getting your kids to brush their teeth. How about going to doctor's visits? How about healthy eating and exercise? How about substance abuse? How about all the things that can affect lifespan? So I'm being a little heavy, forgive me. It's beyond academic performance. It's a life issue, not just an academic success issue, treating ADHD. And so when people ask me why treat, this is why. So I saw a hand, please.
Slightly less heavy than.
Please, I would welcome some lightning up. Yeah. I will get lighter.
And I treat, but is there any research about lack of treating ADHD and screen time addiction?
Indirectly. That's a complicated and intriguing question you're asking, and then what else is more on everybody's minds these days? So certainly kids with ADHD like screens even more than others. It's immediately gratifying, it's the boom, 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 boom that works for engagement. So, some parents will say, well, my kid can't have ADHD. He'll sit in front of the screen for 5 hours. So ADHD is a task and setting specific disorder. And it could just be Legos too, where they can do it forever. But trying to get them to sit in the classroom, sit for homework, things that aren't as immediately gratifying. So kids with ADHD, yes, are at increased risk for problems with overuse of screens. There's no question about it. And, that's a whole behavior management thing that we could have another session on. It's a topic here in my heart. Yes, please.
By untreated ADHD, do you mean unmedicated ADHD?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. The question was, by untreated ADHD, do I mean unmedicated? And I'm going to make a case for that point in a moment. If you're not treating ADHD with medication, you're probably not treating ADHD. This is controversial, but here I'm putting on my Western science geek hat, and it's comparable to the statement: if you're not treating insulin-dependent diabetes with insulin, you're not treating insulin-dependent diabetes. So if you're not treating severe myopia with glasses, you're not treating the vision deficits. So, great segue question. Here's the answer. 1938. How many people would have guessed that year for when we had our first excellent controlled study on the effectiveness of ADHD medication? 1938 at the Bradley Hospital in Rhode Island. There were a couple hundred kids that got institutionalized, because that's what they did back then for challenging behavior. And they were doing a study on what their brains looked like. And they did pneumoencephalograms, where you do a spinal tap and you shoot air up into a kid's central nervous system and see how it looks on plain X-ray. We don't do that anymore. Thankfully, we have MRIs that do the job better. But as you can imagine, these kids had terrible headaches after the procedure. So there was a drug called Benzedrine, which is chemically very similar to dexedrine, dextroamphetamine, Adderall, vitamins, same family. And somebody had an idea, let's give all these kids after their pneumoencephalograms either a placebo or Benzedrine. It was a very well-controlled study. And the cool thing is they were institutionalized and could be observed 24/7 by some very experienced nurses. The Benzedrine did not help their headaches, but the nurses noticed that the kids given the Benzedrine 3 times a day, their behavior was dramatically better. It's like, what are you still doing here, kiddo? They had headaches, but they were focused. They weren't impulsive. And an astute doctor said, maybe there's something to this, as is often the case in medical advance. People discover things by accident. And you can look that study up. It's really a tight, great study. It fell kind of through the cracks over the decades in between. And, we had World War II and other such things. And, but it wasn't a new idea that medication can help kids with poor self-regulation. So the best modern study we have is the MTA, the multi-modal treatment study of ADHD. NIH funded, not a penny of pharmaceutical industry money spent on this. Many centers around the country, 450 kids were randomized into 4 groups. This was a 14-month study. This is compelling, and I want to share the details with you for one moment here to answer the question, is treatment of ADHD medication free or not? Here's your answer. And this study's been repeated, not quite as elegant, but this is the best study we have, but it has been repeated many, many, many times. The kids were randomly assigned, school-age kids, into a community standard group. They were basically waitlisted. Whatever their pediatricians were doing, whatever care they were getting, that just continued. Some of them were getting medicine, some of them weren't. But they weren't getting state-of-the-art medication management. They were getting whatever dose their pediatrician just happened to give them. Second group were kids who got state-of-the-art psychosocial treatment. They got educational support, executive skill support, tutoring. They got specialized classrooms with the best teachers on the planet. They got parent training and behavior management. They got individual counseling for their associated problems. And there wasn't anything that money couldn't buy that these kids couldn't get a psychosocial only group. No medicine, no. A third group was state-of-the-art medication management. You had the world's experts tuning the dose, tuning the dose, tuning the dose, switching, finding the best medicine, getting it right. And the fourth group was combined. State-of-the-art psychosocial treatment, state-of-the-art medication management. These kids were measured up the wazoo. They had classroom behavior, neuropsych testing, grades, home behavior, socialization, you name it, they got looked at before they were put in a treatment group and after. And after 14 months, guess what? All 4 groups got better, just with passage of time, including the community standard group. The community standard group didn't get that much better. The state-of-the-art psychosocial treatment group was no different, indistinguishable from the community standard group. It was as if all of that stuff hadn't been done. The medication-only group, state-of-the-art medication, there was dramatic separation, life-changing differences in functioning across all domains. Not maybe, kind of, sort of. Now here's the intriguing one. What about the kids who had state-of-the-art medication combined with state-of-the-art psychosocial interventions? There was no difference at all between the medication-only group and the medication plus psychosocial intervention groups. You can look it up. And this study, MTA study, Google, you'll get 5 million hits, okay? That's compelling evidence. Now, there was one exception in the combined therapy group. The kids who had ADHD plus anxiety did better with combined therapy, because what's the treatment for anxiety? Cognitive behavioral therapy and other environmental supports. So those kids did better. But in terms of the ADHD symptoms, hyperactivity, impulsivity, distractibility, there was no difference when you looked at those outcome measures regarding those groups. Yes?
So does that make the case that if they have the correct medication management, that all the IEPs
No, because I'm so glad you asked that. I don't want to imply that medication by itself is adequate treatment, but medication is a core piece of comprehensive care. Again, ADHD rarely travels alone. And if you tell me that your child only has ADHD and nothing else, I'd like to talk with you. And I haven't met a kid with only ADHD yet. There's almost always other stuff along for the ride. So yeah, so they need comprehensive supports. And ADHD has secondary issues with behavior. You know, what I spend a good part of my job doing is parent coaching and behavior management, because there's secondary issues that ADHD causes. So we want to help with all the consequences of ADHD. But they need ADHD treated before the other stuff will work very well. So another hand here, yeah.
In recent years, a lot of talk about functional micronutrients, especially omega-3 assets.
Yeah.
What's your comment?
So the question is about micronutrients, is dietary supplements, or we could ask dietary restrictions. So the best research we have, I'll refer you to Joel Nigg's book, NIGG, Staying Ahead of ADHD, something like that. It's a good holistic review of all the different treatments for ADHD. Staying Ahead of ADHD, something like that. It's a good holistic review of all the different treatments for ADHD. And omega-3 fatty acids compared to placebo will give you some improvement in ADHD symptoms. A little, but not like my stimulant medications do. So to augment kids who have partial response to ADHD, I'm cool with it. You know, I have three cans of sardines a week myself. So my family doesn't appreciate that. I love sardines, but you know, good salmon and trout and mackerel and all that. So you can get the same 1,000 milligrams a day if you do that. The other grams a day if you do that. The other brain food that can make a difference, L-methyl-dopa, or excuse me, I'm the L-methylfolate. I'm giving too many talks lately. This is the ADHD talk, Dan. Okay. L-methylfolate is a building block for dopamine and norepinephrine. So it can help with synthesis of dopamine and norepinephrine and give your ADHD medications more stuff to work on. So as a supplement, not as a replacement, but as a supplement to standard ADHD medicines, especially if you have a partial responder, some doctors are readier to make these recommendations than others. There's not a morsel of controlled, repeatable data that gluten-free, casein-free diets are any different than being in a control group. Despite popular opinion, this is Western science time, guys. Okay, that's what the data shows. Dietary controls, Feingold diet does not help with ADHD. It's good nutrition. You know, I think we should all eliminate junk food from our diets as a general pediatrician. I think everyone should be on the Feingold diet, but not that it's going to fix your ADHD. You'll have less heart disease. The two that make some sense are L-methylfolate and omega-3 fatty acids. But anything else you asked me about, I'll say there's no science about it. Yes, please. L-methylfolate is an amino acid. It's a pill. A brand name that it comes in is Defiant. Make sure it's the L isomer. There are other folates that won't do the job. But I'm not recommending that everybody go out and get some. Okay, I'm responding to a good question. But it won't take the place of standard therapy, which I will get to as soon as I answer your question.
Sorry, I just maybe a joke about the question, but what I think would be helpful to understand is sort of what the target is for the medication. In other words, like, when do you know that you're the medication?
Perfect segue question. Thank you. So how do we know what we're measuring? How do we do this stuff? So let's, first of all, quote Barkley, the idea that human self-control is largely self-determined and largely instilled by one's parents during childhood should be discarded on history's conceptual scrapheap until such time as more effective treatments having even fewer side effects have been scientifically identified. The use of stimulant medication as part of a larger treatment package for the management of ADHD should be a first line and mainstay treatment without apology. I agree with Dr. Bartlett, based on the science. So just put my cards on the table, folks, all right? So how do we do this? So first we need to choose targets, choose a medication, observe, gather data. We are not going to be just saying, oh, there's a diagnosis of ADHD based on this checklist. Here's 18 milligrams of Concerta. Call me in a month or see you in a month. No, not going to do that. So on my website, parentchildjourney.com, all this stuff is available for free. If you feel like using my forms, by all means, I hope you find they're helpful. This is a form that can be used for any medication or any therapy, by the way. What we're going to do for a medication trial is put in the typical target symptoms, and I've got online, hyperactivity, distractibility, impulsivity, trouble with social interactions, etc., as target symptoms. And when you're filling this out, and a parent fills it out, children who are old enough to fill it out should participate in their own care. We do this with children, not to children, if they're old enough to do it. Teachers should do baseline ratings. The 2s and 3s for target symptoms, if they come down, to answer your question, the 0s and 1s, you got obstructive juices, sorry. If they come down to 0s and 1s as we gradually increase the dose, we're at the promised land. Before we start medication, we also do baseline ratings for possible side effects, and we're going to review this in a minute. Tics, appetite suppression, insomnia, irritability, more to follow on that in a few more slides. But if any of these numbers go up as we increase the dose, then that's a bad medicine. Simple as that. What you need is data from teachers, from parents, from kids, and we have these forms coming to the prescriber. You can make a Google document, or I have people scan forms and send them. And we collect the data, and then we know whether the benefits are outweighing the risks. It's all laid out clear as day as you gradually increase the dose of a medication. So,
Will the type of medication needed to change over time, or once you find what works for you, that's what's going to be good for everyone?
Most kids who are successfully treated with stimulant medication, we don't have to be hopping around changing medicine all the time. Usually, it's a good long-term thing. If you've got the appearance of a medication effect wearing off over time, maybe you need to rotate the crop and use something different. But the majority of those kids, it's not that their ADHD medicine isn't working. I'm assuming you've tried a little tune-up for growth. Some kids just get bigger and they need a slightly bigger dose. Okay, if that doesn't work, often it's the coexisting problems that are rearing their heads. So the child who has a relative learning problem and expectations have gone up, that can appear as untreated ADHD when it's really a discrepancy between expectations and abilities increasing. A child whose social complexity is increasing, caring more about how they fit in with the world, having some anxiety about that. Just having some anxiety about who I am. What am I going to do with my life? Having some depression, having some difficulty keeping up with other kids on the athletic field. We look at the whole kid when we reassess, not just on the initial assessment, because things change, children's lives evolve. So when your child has been doing well with ADHD medicine and it doesn't seem to be working so well anymore, yeah, think about if we need a medication tune-up, but also think more broadly again, what else is going on in my child's life?
What are your thoughts on how puberty plays into medication?
Puberty and medication. For girls, it's probably a bigger deal than boys in terms of hormone fluctuations and receptors for medication. But it's not a game breaker. Most kids who are having more trouble with ADHD and self-control during adolescence, it's about adolescence, it's about psychological development, not puberty, which is about biological development. So studies have been done looking at hormone levels, sex hormones, and response to medication. And it makes a little difference for some, but not a big difference for most. I do have some girl patients where they seem to have a dip in their medication effectiveness around their menstrual period. And my colleagues, Patty Quinn and Kathleen, they do at the Chesapeake Center. Patty's retired now, but they actually recommend in their book treating girls with ADHD, adjusting the dose of stimulant medication depending upon where you are in your menstrual cycle. I've personally not found that to be necessary, but I ask about it. So it's a complicated question. That's the book to look at for a more detailed discussion about the interplay between female puberty. Boys, it's not that such a big deal. Please. It's got some title that's not, that has the words girls and ADHD. But the authors are Kathleen Nadeau, spelled N-A-D-E. Nadeau and Patricia Quinn. The authors I'm sure of, the title is something like, helping girls with ADHD. Pardon? Understanding. Thank you for that. Yeah, please.
What can you say about the efficacy of ADHD meds for kids on the autism spectrum?
Efficacy of ADHD medications for kids with autism, my single favorite topic. And that's what the third excursion is all about, the overlap between autism, ADHD, and anxiety. As a subject dear to most of my practice in kids on the autism spectrum with coexisting ADHD and anxiety. Generally speaking, if you have autism, certain genetic syndromes, Fragile X, the more complicated you are neurologically, the less predictable the response to stimulant medication, the higher the chance of having side effects, and it's trickier. But we still do the best we can with them. And the majority of kids with autism and ADHD, I can still treat successfully, but sometimes it's a partial response instead of a home run. Quick aside, because it's a topic so dear to me. If you think of ADHD as a kid with poor breaks, living too much in the moment. Hey, kid with ADHD, consider your past, consider your future. Stop and think. We give those kids medication to put on the brakes, to stop and think better. What's the number one side effect of ADHD medication? It's making them too stuck, making them irritable, subdued. You can get some appetite suppression and insomnia too, but the number one reason I have to stop stimulant medication is irritability. I'm losing my emotional flexibility, people. On the other hand, what is anxiety and certain aspects of autism? It's living too little in the moment, considering past experience and future. Hey, how did I do it before? That's how I need to do it again. And if I can't do it the same way I did it before, I'm going to get anxious. And anxiety is a disorder of living too much in the future. What's going to happen? So for many kids with ADHD, for many kids with autism and anxiety, we want to say, hey, don't live so much in the past and the future. Live in the moment. Be more ADHD. So when you've got coexisting ADHD and anxiety autism, what you want to do is treat the ADHD just enough, but don't swing them over to amplify their autism and anxiety, which you could with too much stimulant. And you want to treat their anxiety with either cognitive behavioral therapy first line or an SSRI like Prozac or Zoloft, but not so much that you amplify their ADHD. So it's the complexity of the neurophysiology that makes it hard, but not impossible, to treat these kids the subject of exclusion 3 in the book. So thanks for asking my favorite question. So, yes.
How long should a treatment trial take in order to push us?
Let's do that. Let's do that. And, you know, if they're, why don't I go through the treatment trial thing, and then anybody who had their hand up, remember what you were going to ask? See if I've anticipated your question or not with what I'm about to cover. Well, what time do we have? We still got time. We're cooking, all right? So the choice of medication, stimulants work better than non-stimulants. So stimulants, methylphenidates like Ritalin, Concerta, dextroamphetamines like Adderall, Vyvanse. Dexmethylphenidate is a chemical karate chop methylphenidate into its D and L isomer, and you throw out the left half. Those of you who remember high school biology and chemistry, good luck with this then. But, okay, pediatrician's joke. What's this? Spider doing push-ups on a mirror. Okay, good. Okay, so a chemist, sorry, that one didn't fly. I can picture my wife in fact rolling her eyes. Okay, so what we do is we cut the right half and the left half of the methylphenidate in two, and Folklin or dexmethylphenidate, the right half of methylphenidate. In theory, the good stuff that methylphenidate does lives on the right half of the molecule, the bad stuff on the left. That's way too simplistic an explanation, but Folklin gets listed as a third option because it's a little bit different than other methylphenidates. So you got 3 pitches to throw with stimulants, 3 strikes, you're out. We start with stimulants because generally they work better, but you can have a higher chance of side effects. Non-stimulants are generally backup plans. They generally don't work as well, but they generally avoid side effects better. You can have short-acting, 3 to 4 hours, or long-acting, 6 to, some of these are 14 hours, some of the newbies. Usually we go with long-acting for first in the morning, but then as we'll talk about when we get to trough filling, evening coverage, sometimes we'll touch up and combine short-acting and long-acting. More to follow on that. But the most important considerations when choosing a stimulant, how do you choose which one to start with, Doc? Well, now I got on my computer access to your insurance information. It's way cool. People sign off a privacy waiver on these things. But now I can see your entire medical history through your pharmacy. You didn't know that shit. And the thing is, I can plug in, let's say, I think I want to try Concerta. I'll plug it in, and your insurance is in there. I don't know how it happens, but it'll tell me, yeah, accepted in formulary, or that'll be $400, please. So what your insurance coverage will do, that's not a bad starting point when these things are otherwise created pretty equal. Just as important, I'll ask the parents and the child, hey, how do you want to take this stuff? Because we got a tablet that you can swallow or crush or chew. We got capsules that you can swallow whole or sprinkle into some soft food. We got the capsules as powders can dissolve into a drink. We got liquid medication that you don't have to dissolve, it just comes as a liquid. And we got patches that you can put on your butt and absorb through the skin. So we got all sorts of things, and some kids will have strong feelings about what they want to do. Whenever we can give a child choice, when everything else is equal, I like to give kids choice because they'll be more motivated to comply with the medication if they feel like they've had some say in it. Please.
With some of the brands that are also generic,
Yes.
the insurance
Yeah.
take that.
Right.
Is there
It worries me. The question was, is there a difference between generic and brand? And it worries me. There are some products that are more notorious for crummy manufacturing than others. For example, the generic of Concerta has had a lot of press. It's quite all right. The generic of Concerta is not bioequivalent to brand name Concerta. So that's the one. And I've had some troubles with the generic of Focalin XR. It just switched to it, and it just doesn't seem to work as well. So this gets into word on the street stuff. The FDA just can't keep up with evaluating all these generics and giving us the information we need. So if you can get brand, or at very least, most of you are going to have to get generic because of insurance coverage. At very least, go to the same pharmacy, make sure they're using the same manufacturer. Sometimes, pharmacy, the CVS will cut a deal with a major manufacturer of a generic product, and they switch on you. This used to be kind of pale yellow, now it's bright yellow. What's with that? And it's a different generic manufacturer, and it doesn't work as well. So you need to pay attention, but generally speaking, if you stay with one generic, it's fine to try. When you shift around and the absorption is different, it can be a problem. But I wish we had better regulation over our generics. I really do, please.
Under the stimulants, which one has been on the market the longest?
Under the stimulants,
And which one has the best generic?
yeah, Ritalin and Adderall, or Ritalin and plain old Dexedrine. When I started in practice, all I had in my toolkit was short-acting Ritalin and short-acting Dexedrine. That's what everybody was on, one or the other. And the toolkit, thankfully, has grown larger. The ones that have been around the longest, we do feel better about. But all of these stimulants are so similar. They're just different mechanisms of release. They're the same thing chemically for the most part. Please.
I'm on Adhd. Where does that fit?
Yeah. So Adzenys is a relatively new one. Is your insurance coverage?
Yeah, it does.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a longer acting dextroamphetamine. So it would go. It's a stimulant. It's a dextroamphetamine, longer acting. And we've got all these newbies, Cotempla, Aptensio, ones you all have probably never heard of. But the selling point is they can get you out past that 12-hour mark.
Yeah.
That's the advertising. Some kids, yeah, some kids don't. So there's all sorts of complexity about which to use. Each prescriber kind of has their own favorites, and that's okay. Yeah.
You were saying that with the stimulant that you don't need to check in and do that, so back to that.
Well, generally, but there are exceptions to that for sure. So,
I was going to ask about the non-stimulants, like treatment. Is that something, I think, it's very clear the child's taking Concerta when they haven't had it for a lot of years. Like, obviously,
yeah. So non-stimulants.
for years, how do you know if it's still?
I'm going to come back to that when we talk about discontinuation trials. How do you know when your child's been on a medication, stimulant or non-stimulant? Whether you need to keep giving it. In effect, you do a reverse trial. And I'm going to talk about that, the importance of that, periodically testing out baseline data, discontinuation, see if people can tell the difference. Hugely important question I'm going to dwell on in just a few minutes. We'll take two more questions on this, and then I'm going to move on to some other important things, so please.
So with the different forms of delivery, whether it's a tablet or a patch, could the side effects be different? And it's specifically to my son doesn't eat a lot.
Yeah.
Weight is an issue because
Yeah.
he's a child. And I've heard, not through official channels, that maybe the patch would give him more of an appetite than
So the question is, do different forms of medication have a different impact on certain side effects, in this case specifically on eating? Possibly. So a patch has more gradual onset and more gradual offset. It might not pinch it as hard, boom, up with the blood level with some of the short-acting medicines, depending upon the timing of the meal relative to the increase in the blood level, it will affect appetite differently. But if you use short-acting medicine for a kid who's not eating as a management strategy to have relative troughs happen at mealtime, let's leave him a little bit undertreated so he can eat his lunch and then give another one. That's one of many side effect management strategies that I will get to. But the quick answer is yes. The biggest difference between all these different products, and we have dozens of them now, is not so much the chemicals are different, it's the delivery system, the rate of onset, the rate of offset. And that can affect. I'm going to take one more question on meds in the way back, and then I want to shift to some other important material.
So I'm 11-year-old and we find that very useful. And I'm used to it. I'm the one who's angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then if I don't like it, it makes me feel emotional.
Yes. A legitimate concern. And you're right to stop.
So you find like 3 or 4 different ones.
Yep.
But you definitely need them because teachers and reassure that.
Yep.
You need it. And I'm just interested
Yep.
to think.
So if you are going through a trial and you get into side effects before benefits with one stimulant, then you try another, and you might even try a third. If that doesn't work, then you try a non-stimulant. And if you go through this process, this algorithm, with a good doctor who's patiently working through it and having good communication, then, and you're in that 10 to 20% of kids for whom we can't find an effective medicine. There's no such thing as perfect medicine. So 10 to 20% of kids with ADHD, we're not going to be able to successfully treat. The overwhelming majority of those kids have coexisting conditions that need to be addressed first, and then we circle back to the ADHD. So you can, with medication, amplify some underlying, for example, mood regulation issues. But until you address the mood regulation issue, you might not be as successful treating the ADHD. Maybe in retrospect, it's at least as important to address strategically as the ADHD. So here we don't want to get locked into either or thinking, is it ADHD or mood? We might need to do both to get to the promised land. Just focusing on ADHD as if that's the only aspect of a child's profile that matters to success might not get you where you got to go. Some cases are more difficult and challenging than others, and some human beings are just more sensitive to side effects than others. It doesn't mean that anything was done wrong with management. It just means some kids, you got to keep plugging away at it. So forgive me for shifting gears here for a moment, just because I want to cover some basics in different domains and hopefully still have some time for wider open discussion. So apologies that I won't be able to take every question on each of the topics we're addressing today. I'll do my best. Just very quickly, I'm talking with kids about medication. Let's not be opaque. Let's talk with the kids about, hey, this is your, you know how some things are hard for everybody and some things are easy. What do you think's hard for you? What do you think's easy? What about staying focused, being able to stop and think, being able to control your body? We try to use words that are meaningful to the child at their age of development, and we don't hide medication in liquids and deceive our children about giving them medication. I think there's some ethical concerns about that from my perspective. And one day you're going to have to tell them, right? How long do you think you're going to be able to keep that up? Right? So, drink your juice. And I don't feel like drinking my juice. But you need to drink your juice. What's so important, Mom, about me drinking my juice? Well, I've been putting medicine in it for the last 5 years. You know, so it doesn't work very well. So you don't call it a vitamin, you call it a stop and think medicine, a focusing medicine, whatever. And you know, we don't want to say this is your smart medicine, implying that your kid's stupid. We do want to normalize that, hey, people sometimes need to take medicine for stuff. It's no big deal. Join the club. And there are all sorts of famous people with ADHD. It's nice to find somebody who's appeals to your child. We can teach geeky kids about how these medicines work, about neuroreceptors, and we actually do know how they work, amazingly enough. Just for the interest of time, I'm not going to give you a neurophysiology lecture, but I could. This is one of the very, very few medicines where we know the mechanism of action. Those things we don't have a clue. But we give them the explanation that's right for them. We don't want to overtalk it and communicate our own anxiety to our children. Give them the facts, see if they have questions, follow their lead. If you're nervous about your kid being on medicine, doesn't mean they have to be also. So quick on that. But here I want to get to troughs. This is an under-discussed issue, okay? So many kids are on the right medicine, but it doesn't cover their day adequately. So we have, this is a typical distribution curve for a long-acting medicine. It could be Ritalin LA, Vyvanse, it could be Densis, any of these. There's a time where we give the medicine and it gradually builds up. This is a trough here, but once it goes over the therapeutic level, then we've got medicine that's doing something for a while. But at some point, it's going to kick out. And then we've got another trough. We're under the therapeutic level. And typically, a long-acting medicine, we like it to kick in while they're getting into school and last in the school day. But typically these things are fading out right when it's homework time or after school activity time. And people will say, my kid's medicine isn't working. And I said, well, could you elaborate on that for me a bit? What have you heard from the teachers? Well, I haven't talked to the teachers. And so let me call the teacher or get an ADHD checklist from the teacher. And the teacher's saying, this kid's ADHD has been nailed. This medicine's perfect. And the parent says, wait a minute, I'm not feeling it. So we often have misdiagnosis of ineffective treatment when we got ineffective duration of coverage. So I call this trough filling failure, TFF. And trough filling failure can cause TIFs. Because the morning routine, after school and evening routines can be rough, even if the day is fine. At school, it might kick in too late or kick out too early. After school, if you're a teen or an adult, you might have some problems if you're just covering the daytime. So parent deficit disorder gets diagnosed. Well, he's fine with me, but well, he's under-medicated with me would be the correct answer sometimes. Or one teacher's got him during a medication trough and is struggling, another teacher's got him during the peak, and well, I'm having no problem with it. And most importantly, a child might call themselves stupid or lazy if they've got inconsistent coverage because, well, part of the day I feel here, but part of the day I'm here. What's my problem? Why can't I bring my A game? It's because your doctor hasn't brought this question to the table. So every child who's on ADHD medicine, the doctor should be asking regularly, how's it working? But what's the kick-in time? What's the kick-out time? What's the duration of action? Is that okay? And if you got a doctor who's prescribing medication for your kid's ADHD and hasn't every now and then asked about these kick-ins and kick-outs and duration of action, that needs to be discussed. Because you can fill those troughs. Now, very quickly, there's an error, by the way, on this chart in your handout. I copied this graph twice. So in your handout, this appears here instead of this appearing here. Okay, so apologies about that. So if you want to fill a more early morning trough, you can give short acting and then give the usual long acting. I call that short long. We do this with the error on your handout. On your handout, I made a mistake. I put this curve here and here. This is correct. I just copied and pasted this twice instead of one. So this is correct. So
we can send a digital copy if anyone wants it.
Yeah. And it's in the book, by the way. It's correct in the book. Okay, all these appear in the book. So you can go short, long, fill that trough here with a short acting Ritalin, by the way, and then your long acting Ritalin. Get the day off to a good start. Or you can give a nighttime non-stimulant like guanfacine or clonidine. Give it at dinner or bedtime, and it'll still be on board when your child wakes up in the morning. Fill the trough that way. Or there's this really cool new one called Jornay. That's all right. That happened to me in the movie the other day. Jornay is pretty new. You give it at night, and it's got a delayed release where it releases its mother load in the morning. And then it lasts all day. It's delayed release, extended release. Good luck getting your insurance company to cover that one.
How do you
It's
not
pretty cool.
diagnose when you're doing or addressing the trough periods?
You would see what the kick in and kick out is. So for example, great question. If you know the kick in time is here, then you know short acting medicine is going to kick out there. You have to play a little bit with the timing. But I'll ask parents to make their best guess about kick in, kick out. A good way to tell is, just referring to your child's original symptom checklist. The kids who start talking a lot more, or not being able to sit down, or their appetite spikes up all of a sudden. Or you just can't have a conversation with them on one topic. You can tell their eyes are going every which way instead of on the one thing. So when those symptoms of ADHD just kind of are bubbling back, that's your kick out time. And your kick in time is when they're going away. Some kids you can tell kick in and kick out, other kids you can't. It's more subtle. And then you have to make educated guesses, and an experienced prescriber can tell you, well, usually this medicine lasts about this long. Let's make an educated guess about kick in and kick out. Yeah.
Don't stimulants take effect relatively quickly?
Short-acting stimulants do, and some of the long-acting stimulants do. But some of them take forever to kick in. Like Daytrana patch can take 2 hours to gradually kick in. Cotempla, this oral dissolving one, can take 1.5 to 2 hours to kick in, but you get more staying power. So you got to know your product. So the first line ones, what you said is generally true.
Like 12 minutes? Sorry.
Yeah.
Like half an hour, 45 minutes?
15 to 30 minutes. Yeah, please.
My son is short release medicine because he plays baseball in the afternoon. So we're under the impression that the stimulant has a negative impact to athletic ability. Is that true?
Do a controlled experiment. See what his batting average is on stimulant versus off stimulant. Some kids say they feel better off stimulant, and they do. But there's a reason why stimulant medication has been banned as a performance-enhancing drug by the International Olympic Committee. So what you're looking at there is afternoon trough filling, where you're going long and short. You're giving short-acting medicine there to fill it as a common strategy. But you could just as well do it with a longer-acting morning one. Or some kids who are rapid metabolizers, There are 5 ants they're concerned with, they only get 5 to 6 hours out of it. And then you give a second dose of the long acting, you go long to get sports or school or social activities covered at the end of the day, and so on. So let me see who hasn't raised their hand. Yes.
Is there any benefit for the kid to maybe give them medication during heavy academic days versus not giving them any medication on just very easy?
Yeah, so differential prescribing, giving medicine on high need days and withholding it on low need days. There's a couple potential problems with that strategy. It's rational. This gets into art of medicine, you know. So let's say, how accurate are we at predicting how hard an assignment is going to be for a child on a given day? Well, sometimes we'll be right on, but a lot of times it turns out to be a longer assignment, harder one, or just discovered that there's an assignment to do. You know, these are kids with executive dysfunction after all, right? So the general strategy is to err on over-treating rather than err on under-treating. Now, can you give a lighter dose depending on certain circumstances? I have some athletes who like a little lighter dose when they're playing their sport, and they experiment around and find that they feel better, do better. There's some artists, performers who need their medicine, but they don't want to be quite as hyper-focused if they're playing improvisational jazz, for example, or they get a little anxious edge when they're performing. So I think there's room for discussion on this, but as a general rule, I like to find a daily dose and daily. What usually happens, and let's make that our foundation for treatment. We can play with it a little bit. For example, if there's a special event in the evening and we want to give a short-acting medicine later that night, fine. Or if you're going on weekends or at camp, you might want to have a lighter dose, or lean more on non-stimulants than stimulants. But generally speaking, if you're lightening a dose to avoid side effects, like the kids who are on drug holidays on weekends and camp, and their ADHD is being undertreated, my first reaction is, well, they're probably on the wrong medicine. Like, if you need to take a drug holiday, it's probably, a need of a fresh look at what they're taking. One guy's opinion. Please.
How much appetite suppression should you expect?
Let's talk about side effects. You get the idea with this trough filling, okay? I won't go into every detail, but let's talk about side effects. Well, one more comment on filling troughs. I already alluded to this. Whether to fill a trough or not depends upon how much impairment your child is having during trough time. Sometimes we leave troughs. We let blood levels drift so that they can eat, so that they can function in some settings in a less medicated state. I'm okay with that, as long as it's done thoughtfully and you do an experiment. Don't make an assumption. In God we trust, everybody else better have data. So, side effects. These are the common ones, right? What time we got? We're good. Nutrition and growth. You won't grow because of some hidden impact on your hormones. You might not grow if you're not eating enough. So it's not a hidden thing. Any parent worth their salt can tell if their kid's not eating. And a good prescriber will check a child's weight and height and blood pressure every single visit and periodically plot it on a chart. And if you're not eating enough, or you're pretty sure it's going to impact growth, or you're seeing that it's affecting mood, you're getting the hangries, then you've got a decision to make. Do I have to stop this medicine? Is it mild enough where I can just monitor over time and see how it plays out? Or are there some simple accommodations I can do? If it's really bad, find another drug. If you're not sure, observe. If, let's see what we can do to minimize. Then again, you might shift the timing of meals, the timing of the dose of the medicine. You might lower the dose of the medicine just a little bit. Sometimes you try all that and it's not good enough. You're put in this dilemma where you either have to stop treating a child's ADHD, not a good thing for the reasons I gave earlier, or have a kid not grow. Then you can do some tricky things. If it really means a devil's trade-off, don't treat my kids ADHD or don't have them eat enough to grow, we can get some appetite stimulants. So for example, Periactin is the brand name for cyproheptadine, a long time-honored crummy antihistamine, but a great appetite stimulant. And I've got some kids with appetite suppression, and I've done everything I can to find a medicine and a dose and timing, and with power shakes and supplements. The parents have jumped through 5 million hoops to get the calories, but we're getting into a food fight, and we don't want to create an eating disorder secondary to treatment of ADHD. Cyproheptadine usually works. About 75% of the time, twice a day dosing. Remeron is an anti-anxiety, antidepressant medicine that also helps with insomnia and also improves appetite. It's a trifecta. The common ADHD kid who has anxiety, insomnia, and poor appetite can take Remeron and get a threefer. So we got some tricks up our sleeve. Sometimes consulting with a good pediatric nutritionist can make a difference. So I'm taking your good question, thank you, as one example of how to decide whether to stop, just monitor, accommodate, or treat. But we can apply the same categorizing to any of these other common side effects. And I'd like to open it up to how to manage side effects if there are other questions along those lines. Yeah.
I'm just curious, going all the way back to the person who asked about puberty in boys.
The person who has the puberty?
Who asked about it.
You little person.
I'm curious whether there's any offset that you've seen to, boys in particular tend to eat everything in sight when they get into puberty, whether there's any blunting of the appetite suppression and the medication from just a natural, wanting to eat all the time because you reach your growth spurt in your teens due to puberty.
Yeah,
Does this make sense?
I'm not sure I'm following your question yet. I understand you're wondering if the normal increase in growth, the increased calorie demands of puberty
can help with that appetite suppression from the medication.
Could that offset?
Exactly.
In my experience, no. In my experience, it seems impossible to me.
Right. So don't hope.
In my experience, if a child's on, if you're waiting for puberty to fix your kid's medication appetite suppression problem, that's very wishful thinking. And usually a child who's got a problem from appetite suppression where they're not growing adequately, that's not going to be fixed by puberty. In fact, it might even be made worse because the calorie requirements are so much higher, it might have even more of a calorie deficit. So if there is a side effect of any kind, you have to decide how to respond to it. I go bonkers when I'm doing a second opinion and a child's been having any side effect for any period of time, and the parents say, well, the medicine's working great for the ADHD, but no, this side effect that we're just living with. I'm thinking, well, why are we just living with it? The goal of effective ADHD care is a life-changing positive difference in ADHD symptoms and no significant side effects. Now, if I have to tolerate some nuisance side effects, the child who has a little irritability at the end of the day that lasts 10 minutes, then we just give them some space for 10 minutes. That's a side effect. The child who blinks a little bit more than usual. Technically, that's a stimulant-induced tic, but it's not bothering the child. The parent's the only one noticing it. There's no medical repercussions. The child who takes 10 more minutes to fall asleep at night. These are examples of the things I would monitor. But if it's not something that you want your child to live with, it's affecting their comfort, it's affecting their socialization, it's got health repercussions, we should do something about it. Sometimes change the medication altogether, but at least make some adjustments.
I just have to ask, can some of those involuntary behaviors, even when you go off of medication, stay present? So something like picking or pulling, can that become a behavioral habit?
Those are the ones that can linger a bit,
Okay.
because they can become learned behaviors. The picky, ticky, pulley kids, you should see it softening if it was tightly tied to the stimulant medication. And I tell parents, this is the one that we hope it softens a bit, but we might need more time to unlearn it. We might even need to combine discontinuation or lowering the dose of the medication with some habit reversal training. All the others generally don't linger if they're tightly tied to the medication. So if you're not eating because of medication, lower the dose, stop the medication, you will eat. Now, if you assume that your child's not eating because of medication, and you stop medication and they're still not eating, get ye to your pediatrician and have a broader evaluation done for the long, long list of things that can affect appetite other than stimulant medication. Please.
Is, in terms of the appetite suppression medication, taking regular holidays, so, on Saturdays, take the day off, spring break,
Sometimes you can reduce the dose and reduce the appetite suppression on low demand days. But again, I'll make the generalization. Most of my patients have ADHD as a life issue, not just a school performance issue. And my preference is to help that child function to their potential without impairment as they're forming relationships with peers, as they're doing non-academic learning, as they're interacting with their siblings and their parents, as they're learning some self-care. So I'd rather fix the problem with the medication than undertreat the ADHD. I've got a couple of kids in my practice where it really is just about academics, and they truly are not impaired, despite my 5 million questions making sure that I'm not undertreating them. I become convinced, but I watch them like a hawk, because I know they're at risk for having some ADHD problems over time. The longer I go undertreated. So a lot of this is age dependent, right? The little kid who's not treated after school, it's not as big a deal as the big kid. Please.
How often should a parent see a pediatrician or another doctor?
How often should he be monitored?
Yes.
During the trial period, you should be in contact at least. I do a lot of email and phone stuff, once a week during the trial period. I think less than once a week during the trial or titration period is not what I do. For maintenance, once you're locked and loaded and you're going along, I tell folks once a season, spring, winter, fall, summer. If my kid's doing great, I'll give them the summer off, but I'll have to see. But in the book, there's a discussion on more than refills. That seeing your ADHD doc should involve a lot more than just checklist, here's your medicine. We should be doing anticipatory guidance about sexuality, about safety, about educational issues, executive dysfunction issues, peer interaction. If you're being a real doc and not just somebody who happens to own a prescription pad, you take advantage. Dirty little occupational secrets, and people have to come back for refills because they're controlled substances. I got them. They can't stay away from me. I am so glad that ADHD medications require my signature, that they can't be put on automatic refill. Then my patients can't disappear, and I have an opportunity to say, sorry, you gotta come in to, get the refill. And what I'm really thinking is, it's my opportunity to do actual holistic medicine instead of just going the way of child psychiatry, which has become exclusively biological. They are the ones who abandoned the biopsychosocial model, and developmental behavioral pediatrics came into existence, I think, to fill that void. Oops, I promised you first, sorry. Then you got next.
My kid was diagnosed with ADHD and other things until he was nearly 17. He's now at college administering his own meds. This happens at great variation depending on when classes start and all of that. Probably forgets sometimes as well. Are there any considerations, concerns, or is it really just whatever works?
Yeah, so the college transition thing is challenging, and we have gotten better, we mean doctors, about preparing kids for transition, but really starting in 9th grade, if not before. So when my patients in middle school, 9th grade, I will tell families, gradually share responsibility for medication refills. Use a pill box, fill up once a week, start contacting me, having the kids contact me by email for their refills, having the kids start scheduling their own appointments with me. More and more of the time is spent with the child, less with the parents. Certain circumstances, having us make exceptions there. But the idea is to prepare the kids for transition over the years rather than having them go on some sort of self-care cliff.
Getting them to recognize their own trough symptoms.
Yeah.
So great to
we
see.
have all from the get-go, from a very early age, we should involve the children in their discussions about their medication. They should be decision makers from the get-go. Then it feels more natural when they do go on. We take one question, then I want to hit discontinuation before we have to wrap up. Please.
Thank you for that form. We're in week 3 of my 3rd graders medication trial. I'm going to use that form today with the pediatrician.
Cool.
And give it to his.
Cool. Now you need baseline ratings.
Exactly.
Before medication is
I think
started.
we can kind of go back to 3 weeks ago. So he was diagnosed with ADHD, Defiant type, and very strongly suspected ODD. What we're finding in the
A diagnosis that I think should not exist.
Okay.
I'll elaborate on that in a moment.
Okay. So the challenge is that I do see some improvement on the ADHD. However, I am also seeing some of his defiance, anger, irritability, spike, but quickly diffuse, whereas we spike and continue.
That's since you started medication.
Since you started
That's a medication side effect that's unacceptable and should be fixed. Now, quick aside, oppositional defiant disorder. God, I hate that diagnosis. It's, kids have oppositional defiant symptoms. Newsflash, right? But that's not a disorder, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of some underlying issue or issues that we need to get at in order to help the child. Kids do well when they can. And to label them as oppositional defiant, it's like we're branding them. So often kids have oppositional defiant symptoms because of ADHD. Or learning problems, social problems, anxiety, depression. Let's figure out where their oppositional defiant symptoms come from. This is in the introduction to my first book, The Parent-Child Journey, a rant against the diagnosis of ODD. So my first book is a 450-page case against making the diagnosis of ODD and thinking more holistically about where children's behavior problems come from. Then we can individualize an approach instead of just throwing them all in timeout or grounding them or taking away their electronics. These are reactive strategies, not what I favor, proactive strategies. Let's get out in front of the behavior. So a quick word on discontinuation, and then we will discontinue. That's totally unintentional. So there are two reasons to stop a medication that your child's been on. One is, hey, is this stuff still working? Do we still need it? Two is, hey, is this symptom a side effect of the medication or just totally coincidental? So sometimes we do accidental discontinuations. We run out of medicine, or we forget, or our kids stuff it in the sofa. If there's an accidental discontinuation, I say, well, what's the data? How did it go? A controlled discontinuation trial is better. So it's the same thing that we did with initiation, only in reverse. Hey, here's our baseline on such and such a dose. What are our numbers? And then if it's a non-stimulant, we need to gradually taper those. If it's a stimulant, you can just cold turkey stop. Don't do it the day before a final exam. Okay, pick a time that's low stakes to do a discontinuation trial, and then see what happens. And if the numbers that were zeros and ones spike up to twos and threes, well, golly, I guess it's still doing something. If some side effect numbers go down, though, maybe it's doing some harm. Sometimes things that we thought were side effects actually get worse off medication. For example, a child who's not sleeping, we stop medication and sleeps even worse off medication. So sometimes we discover partial treatment. And in the book, I take you through all the different permutations of discontinuation trials. So there's much more to talk about. But you get a feel for how to do good science when you're wondering long-term about management issues. Questions?
How long should a discontinuation trial last? How long?
About a week.
Okay.
For stimulants. Or, 1 day if all hell breaks loose. Yeah.
Can go cold turkey.
Yeah, stimulants, you don't have to, stimulants, each day's a new day. It's in you, it's out of you. I'm so glad you asked that. Many pediatricians do an excellent job. And I having first been a primary care pediatrician, I have a little bit of a problem with generalizations made about generalists. I thought I did a pretty good job with this stuff when I was a primary care provider. And many of my colleagues are quite expert, and they know their own limits. When they get to a certain level of complexity, they might then refer to a subspecialist. But I always suggest that people start with their pediatrician and ask, hey, how much of this do you do? What's your comfort zone? And most of them will say something like, well, I'm cool with first-line management, but if things aren't going well, then I'd rather refer out, or at least get a consult. If your child has a lot of coexisting problems, mood disorders, learning problems, autism, tic disorders, etc., baseline, then most pediatricians will say, hey, that's over my comfort zone. Let's start with a child psychiatrist, a child neurologist, a developmental behavioral pediatrician. So, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and good docs know what their own limits are, and hopefully have no shame in sharing those and be honest with you about whether to go elsewhere. Please.
Since ADHD is a lifelong condition for
For most people.
Can you talk about the long-term effects of being on stimulants, efficacy over time,
Yeah.
addiction, all of those kind of things?
Yeah. And maybe we'll make this our closing.
And you wanted to ask about the interest for the spring?
Yeah, remind me after I
Yeah.
answer her excellent question, the long view here. So, there are good long-term studies now. They are generally retrospective because you couldn't ethically put 1,000 kids in a treatment group and 1,000 kids in a placebo group and watch them over 40 to 50 years. That study will never be done. But retrospectively, what we know is long-term, through appetite suppression, suboptimal calories. If you have suboptimal weight gain over enough years, you'll have a slight hit in terms of ultimate height. The exact number, based on some good research, is 1 inch. Give or take, on average, kids who are treated for many, many years on therapeutic doses of stimulant medication, on average, will be 1 inch shorter than they would be otherwise. Now, these are kids who need medication over many, many years. And I will ask parents, so far I've gotten a consistent response every time I ask. I'll ask parents, would you rather have your child be 1 inch taller or have them with undertreated ADHD? Every single parent I've ever asked that question to votes for 1 inch shorter kid. Now, and that's an average. There are many, many, many of my patients. I'd like to think with my careful attention to appetite, I think my own personal track record avoiding deceleration in height is better than the research literature. I think. I don't have science to support my wishful thinking on it. I'd like to think so. Heart issues come up. There was a very, very, very terrible thing done by the Canadian equivalent of the FDA about 20 years ago, where they were, get this for bad science, okay? This should be in a statistics introductory course. There were 12 deaths, sudden unexplained cardiac deaths, in people who happened to be on stimulant medication. This was during a 5-year period. Think about this for a minute. In all of North America, including children and adults. Now I ask you, budding biostatisticians out there, what do you think the baseline rate of sudden cardiac death is in all of North America for a 5-year period in children and adults? What would you guess? Thousands of people have cardiac deaths in a 5-year period, children and adults, mostly adults, over a 5-year period. So there were 12 who happened to be on stimulants. This is science. Not allowing Adderall to be sold in Canada for a 3-year period, which is what the Canadian government did. And why just Adderall, by the way? So the science community went bonkers about this, rightfully criticized the Canadian government, and sheepishly they admitted that they were wrong, and you can now get Adderall in Canada again. So there was all of this research done in response to this bad science, looking at blood pressure, pulse, ejection fraction, everything you can have a cardiologist measure, and there are measurable but clinically insignificant differences. So you can have your pulse up a little, your blood pressure up a little, but does it put you at risk for strokes or heart attacks, etc.? To the best of our knowledge, no. So we no longer require kids to get EKGs before going on stimulant medication. When all this was going on, the American Heart Association temporarily asked us to do that, but that turned out to be so. So those are the two issues that come up, growth and heart. Tics is a complicated one, where 90% of kids with tic disorders also have ADHD. What's the tic disorder evolving and what's triggered by stimulant medication is complicated, but the latest research that's been developed over the last 20 years is being on stimulants contemporarily amplify tics, but they won't change the long-term evolution of a tic disorder. So these are the issues that come up most. So we will, because of time and their kids coming in, have to stop. I could talk. I could talk all day about this. 7 days a week, but I love sharing it with you. How many of you might be interested in, what time would it be? If we did
We could do anytime during the day, Monday through Friday.
Yeah,